Hello, everyone, and welcome to part one of our three-part SLIPS filing webinar series for the 2024 tax year. My name is Sarka Hodja. I'm a CPA, CGA, and a Senior Product Manager at TaxCycle. What I'm going to cover here in part one is your global options settings. We're going to talk about some of the T4 adjustment options that you can set up in your global settings. We're going to do some competitor and TaxCycle carry forward. We're going to create a T4, a T5 from a T2 module. We'll show you how to do that. And we'll review some of the engagement defaults and footers that are available in the SLIPS modules. We're going to do an import and carry forward of XML. We're going to create an Excel import template, and we're going to import an Excel template that I've already prepared into the T4 file so you can see how that works. And we'll quickly review the missing SLIPS template. So let's dive into the content. So we're going to start with the options, and here the options, you can get to them along in the start screen from the menu in the side. There's a link to the options here, or you can get to them at the top. The little wrench here denotes the options as well. And then in the file, there are a number of places also where you can get to options if you like. I do recommend reviewing all of your options at the start of your tax season because we'll have new modules. You want to make sure those are all up to date so that it will run smoothly for you as the year progresses. Okay, so the primary one that is most important for SLIPS is here under the transmission tab, and you'll want to go to your SLIPS accounts, and here you want to make sure that you have your transmitter number entered that was given to you from CRA, usually your business number, and an RZ extension and program number, and then the related web access code that CRA provides as well. So when you're transmitting SLIPS, you can transmit them using your own web access code that you have for your business, or you can use the web access account number and code that was given to your client. That is entirely up to you which one you want to use. The only thing that you have to make sure is that the web access code password matches the account number. So they have to come in pairs. If you're using your client, I would suggest you don't enter it here and just enter that information directly in the transmit window when you go to transmit the SLIPS information. If you're using your own, then I would enter that here, and that will automatically populate for you in the transmit window when you're going to do that. If you're filing releves for Revenue Quebec, then you'll need to also enter your transmitter number for Revenue Quebec and your identification number that was assigned to you, and also the releve sequence numbers that you were issued from Revenue Quebec at that time. All of that information is required in order to transmit releves. Okay, so we also wanted to cover slip transmitters, so you want to make sure that all of your slip transmitter information is also entered and up to date. If you're going to use electronic signatures, you'll want to make sure that you have your TaxCycle notifications enabled. And in TaxFolder, you have the option to show or not show. So by default, it's to show, invite new clients to TaxFolder and ask them to upload documents. This applies to all of the modules in TaxCycle, not just the SLIPS filing. DocuSign is a connect or refresher connection. And then, of course, if you're invoicing, you'll want to make sure your provider for your records is connected as well, so you can post that invoice over. The other one I wanted to just highlight is in the general settings is the common folders. So if you're using SlipSync, and I'll cover that in part 3, I believe, of the webinar series, this is putting that information from the slips that you've prepared into a digital file that will be recognized when you open up to a T1 to prepare that personal tax return. It will go and find any slips that you've published to SlipSync. But again, we'll cover that later. By default, it goes into this folder, Program Data, Trilogy, TaxCycle, and Published Slips. And what else did we need to cover in here? So then we will just pop down to the T4 section. So open that up. And in here, you want to make sure that your file naming is set up the way that you want it. So by default, or rather my settings are issuer name, and then adding the adjusted date if I make an adjustment to that file. But there are a few other options here. All of these settings in your TaxCycle options will apply to every single file that you're creating in TaxCycle. So it'll just speed up some of your data entry. So file naming, and under new file, you'll want to make sure that all of these settings are up to date. There's a few new ones in here this year. So what you want to carry forward from your engagement form, whether or not you want to carry forward your prepare checklist. That's if you've got that turned on, you get the little check marks along the side for each form. Language of correspondence you set in here. These are new. The set defaults for the dental reporting that has to happen on the T4 and T4A slips. So you can set a default here if you like, if all of your clients typically have the same one, and there might be some outliers, it'd be faster to just default those. You have your adjustment options, so you can adjust to the exact premium that's calculated for the year. You can adjust to the premium if it's over the threshold, or you can adjust the contribution based on the maximum contribution that's required if it's only under contributed. So if it's over, it would leave it. If it's under contributed, it would adjust it up to what is required, so you can avoid those pure reports. You can also set your default for the T2200 here. So if most of your companies that you work with issue a T2200 for their employees, you can set that as a default here to automatically create those. And then these are our tolerance levels for the adjustment options we talked about earlier, and you can adjust those by deduction type. And then finally, there are defaults for the signing date and whether or not you want to send 0 slip value options. If you had set those up last year, you can right-click on that folder and copy it up to 2024. And then just double check that the new options are set up the way that you want them to. All right. If you're using invoicing, you want to make sure that your pricing is set up the way that you want it. So I had in default put in an hourly rate, and also to invoice by schedule, I put in a per slip price here. And I selected this little box next to price so that it'll use my custom description. Otherwise, by default, it will use this one that is out of the box. There is also, if I scroll over, there's a line there. If I'm working in French, I can put in my French description as well. If I'm copying my pricing from last year, so just right-click on here and you can apply to the new year, then I can come back into 2024 after I've applied that, and I can adjust my prices up or down in 1% increments by using the links along the bottom. Next is your print sets. So you want to make sure all of your print sets are set up the way that you want. You can configure your printer at the same time so that will save you some effort as you're preparing your various returns. I will point out also that this year we have added out of the box the T2200 employee copy as its own print set, so you don't have to manually create that anymore. Review messages, I just suggest you come in here quickly, click on the little link at the bottom that says show disabled review messages, so you can see the ones that are turned off and determine whether or not you need to turn them back on for this tax season. Conversely, if there are ones that are on that you want to turn off that are just annoying for you, you can go ahead and just deselect them along the side, and then they won't be triggered in your files anymore. And finally, I just want to cover workflow. So if you're using workflow and client manager, which pulls all the workflow information up into the client manager screen, so you can easily find and filter files as you're working on them, so you can see what their state is. Then I'll recommend that you also make sure that you update this. You can turn off anything that you don't need. So if I don't care about tracking when an engagement package was sent, and I don't care about tracking some of this other stuff, I can just turn that off in here. And I can also turn off, like maybe I am a sole proprietor and I only want one review mark, so I can leave that on and turn off this second one if I like. I can narrow this down to just the items that are necessary for me that I want to track. The only caveat is that at least one has to be required in each section, and you are good to go with your workflow. Next, we're going to talk about file carry forward. So I'm on my start screen right now. I've selected my T4 module, and my 2023 years are all here. If I hover over this arrow, purple arrow, that is my carry forward icon. So I can click on that to carry forward a 2023 year, or I have a carry forward here, but that's going to default me to the 2024 year. And I also have the option to carry forward from the side here as well. So if you click here and you realize none of my files are showing, then just go down to the bottom here and click on whatever relevant file end you want, or just click all files, and all of your files will then show in here. So I'm going to show you from client manager's point of view. I do have, for this webinar, I set up a couple of competitor files, so you can see how those work seamlessly also for carry forward. So if I pick on profile and I right click on my file here from my client manager, I get my carry forward option in the side. This option will also be available to me if I go in through File Explorer and I click find this file in my Explorer. If I right click there, I also will have the option to carry forward from there as well. So if I carry forward here, profile has multiple types of slips in a single file. So it's going to tell me I found these slips, in this case the NR4, T4, T4A, and T5 slips were prepared in that one profile file, and it wants to carry forward all of them. I can just carry forward the T4 if I want, or I can select to carry forward all of them. I'm not going to worry about forms because we're not talking about that here today. And if I do that, then it's going to go ahead and carry forward all of that information, and it's going to create all the new files for me. So you can see there's my new T4 that it created. And it's carried forward all of the information from the info form, the individual employees in there, and all of the prior year data as well will come forward in that file for me. I'm going to go ahead and close that now. There's my NR4 and my T5. We'll go back to our start window. And let's next talk about creating slips from a T2. So I did have a T2 there in my client manager as well. So I'm just going to reapply my filters and go back to my T4 layout. Okay, so I had unique ideas, so we're going to open up that file. We're going to assume this is a new client to my firm, and so I don't have a prior year to carry forward for these guys. I want to create a brand new file. I can do that easily by going to my data tab up at the top, And I have the option to create a number of different new files from here. So a T4 if I have employees, a T5 if I'm issuing a dividend for this corporation, T5018 if they have contractors that we need to report income for. I can also create forms and elections from here. I can create a T3 or an NR4 if I need to. And I can do that for multiple years. So in this case, I want to create a 2024 for T-slips. So I'm going to click on that. It's going to take all the information it can from the corporation on the info form, and it's asking me if I want to also pull in all of the details from the S50 where I have the shareholder information. And I'm going to say yes, because that will save me some keying and speed up my tax preparation here. So when I click yes, it's going to go ahead and create that T4 for me. And you can see that it's brought in my 3 employees already that were on my S50 in my T2 file. And it's brought in all of my corporate information up at the top here. So that makes my preparation much easier as I go through. It's also brought in my signing person for me, so I don't have to rekey all that information. So it's just going to make tax season run that much more smoothly for everybody. Okay. So I am going to close that now. And we'll go back to my start window. We're going to create a new file. So we'll go back here, back to T4, and we're going to create a new T4 file. Just want to go over a few of the options here now on the info page. City, when you've entered that for the issuer, you can choose to use that issuer city on all new slips. So if I have a company I'm working with and all of their employees work in the same city, I'm going to want to select that and also the issuer province. So again, will save me if I'm manually keying in the slips. I won't have to enter in the city and province a bunch of times. It will just automatically pull that based on what I have here for the issuer. So one, both, or none, whatever makes sense for you in this particular file. It is not a global option like we talked about earlier. It is only specific to this file. We're going to need to set the province of employment. So if the majority of my employees are in Calgary, I'm going to want to set this to Alberta. So let's go ahead and do that. And then I have a few additional options I can set based on type of slip here. The ones I want to point out is these for new slips for the Create T2200 and Reduce DI. We're going to cover those in part 3 of this webinar series. The dental benefit will populate from options if I set that up in my options, or I can select it here for this particular file. I can add a footnote to every single slip. So this is a global footnote. All the T4 slips will get the same footnote. There's a separate footnote section for specific recipient footnotes that you want to add, but this one is applicable to everybody. So you don't have to enter that a bunch of times. And if I have most of my employees have the same sets of other information boxes that reporting, for instance, I might have other taxable benefits that apply to every single employee or most of my employees. I'm going to want to set this as a default as well here. And then as I'm creating my slips, it's going to add that other taxable allowance and benefits information on my slip automatically for me. So again, it will just speed up my processing time. If I'm filing releves, I need to come down to this filing section, and I'm going to select yes here for filing releves for people living in Quebec. Releves will be triggered based on, for T4s, based on a province of employment, or if they're living in Quebec. And then let's talk about the engagement form a little bit. So let's go down here to the engagement form and populate this information. If you're using workflow, you'll want to make sure that you've got your key dates that you care about in here to track so that you can pull that information up in Client Manager and find the files that might be coming due at specific points in the workflow. You have the option to add a comment in here, instructions, or something that you want to remind your preparer of next year when the file is carried forward, and you can select that instructions to carry forward to next year. All of this prepare information will come in from your options. And then at the bottom, we have an option to add an updated address if the client has moved mid-year and you know that their address needs to be updated next year. You can put that in here, and this new address will carry forward to next year's file for you. Okay, so now we're on to importing XML files. So if I go to my T4, I can carry forward an XML file from last year. And again, that's under your data tab. If I go to carry forward XML, I can go and find those. And for those of you that might be new to tax preparation, XML file is the format that is used to transmit all of the information to CRA. And it is also the format, coincidentally, that we use for our SlipSync information. And also the format that you can export from a number of accounting software to that support payroll. So for example, QuickBooks or Xero have an option to export to XML, and then you can grab that XML file and import it here so you don't have to rekey all of that data. It will already be there for you in the XML file. So if we happen to have last year's, but we don't have the file, we can carry forward last year's XML file. So I have it here. If I click on that, it's going to bring in all that information. And you'll notice too that if I scroll down, it's going to populate all my prior year data for me as well, which is handy. And that XML also has populated all of the details that it can on my issuer section on the info page. Now, if I made a mistake and I picked the wrong XML file, maybe now I have a current one and I'd rather use that, I can just undo at the top here. And it reverts my file back to the state prior to that import. So now if I go to my T4, I can import the current year instead. And there is all my current year data now in the file from my XML. You'll notice that the icon has also changed. So the little yellow star here that shows in the icon tells me that there is imported data on that form for me. I also wanted to mention that some of the accounting software will also export XML for your T5018 slips as well. So you might want to look for that to make sure that if you can, because that will certainly save you a lot of time in preparing those slips. So next up, we want to talk about the importing slips from Excel. To create an Excel template, you just need to make sure you have at least one slip of that type entered, and you don't have to have all of the information. You can just add a character in any one of the fields just to make a slip active in there. And then you would go up to your data tab and Excel import, and you can create a template here. So if I click on that now, it's going to show me all of the available fields that I can add to my template from this slip. Anything that is calculated by default, so province, which I've set on the info page, is calculated onto my slip for me. So by default, it's selected as no. So I'm not going to include that in my Excel template. I can sort by box number, by field code. I can sort by description, or I can search. Maybe I'm looking for box 40. I can search for that and toggle on and off the things that I want to see in my template. So I'm just going to leave the defaults here. I'm going to click OK. And it's going to ask me where I want to put that. And I'll just pop that in here and save. And then it will bring up a little window that reminds me where I just saved that. I can click on that and go ahead and open up that template file if I like. Instead, though, I am going to open up my template file for you here. So this is the one that I've already prepared for this webinar. It has a number of employees already populated in here. All of this data is fake data, so none of this is real information that I'm sharing with you. Rows 1 through 5 are the information that TaxCycle requires in order to be able to match up the data and map it into the software. So don't change anything under rows 1 to 5. You can add formatting if you like. What I did was I just opened up all the columns so that it's easier to read and data enter into. TaxCycle doesn't care about the formatting. It does care about the content in the cells. So don't change any of that or you'll lose your mapping. The actual slip data, so each row will create its own slip in here. And if I go across here, you can see also that I've added in all of the employment income information, whether or not CPP or EI is exempt. And I've added a couple of columns at the end here for some additional slip reporting information as well. If I now go into my file, oh, sorry, one thing I did forget to mention, I'll just open that back up, is in this, scroll back to the beginning, in this top row, so in the key field, this is what TaxCycle uses to determine which of these fields it's using to match up to existing data in your file. So if I already had Tamara in there and I've got the SIN column key field set to true, it's going to look for this SIN, and then it will add this information based on the SIN that it's matched to. It won't create a new record. If that SIN doesn't exist, then it will create a new record in my file. So that will save on creating duplication. Anything set to false, we'll just ignore that field for my matching. And it's best practice to try to limit that to one field that you're matching on. And typically that will be the one that is going to be unique to each taxpayer, which in this case is the SIN. Okay, so now I'm back in here and I want to import all of that data that I have in my Excel spreadsheet. So again, back up to my data tab, Excel import, and I'm going to import my slips. And I'm going to go to my data import file that I was showing you before, and I'm going to double click on that or open it in the bottom. And now it's added all of those additional employees that I've put in my Excel file. I have also seen, just for everyone's information, I've seen a number of files where this export tab is populated with formulas, and they create the actual data here on sheet 1 and then calculate it into the export. TaxCycle doesn't care. It just cares about what the contents is on the export. It's only going to read the export tab, so you can add other tabs, as many as you need or like to have, format them however you want. TaxCycle's only going to care, again, about this export tab. And again, if I've exported the wrong Excel file by mistake, I can click undo, and then it will remove everything that I just added into the file, and I can go and then find the file that I wanted to import. And lastly, in today's webinar, I wanted to mention the missing slip information template. So if I collapse all of these on the side and I go to my correspondence section, in here are all of my templates. So I've got some labels and I've got this missing letter template. So I can use this to send to my client the information that I still require from them for their various employees in order to complete their slips filing. This will include all of the slips that I've prepared in here. So all of the missing information will show up in this slip. And I can either print this out and email it, or you can click the little email thing. And if you're connected to a desktop email, it will pick that up and create an email for you to send that way as well. You'll notice that there's no engagement letter template in here, and that is by design because a number of preparers do not use engagement letters for T4 engagements. And so if you do want one, if you'd like to use that as part of your practice, you can add a custom template here using the template editor. And there's a whole other webinar that deals with how to do that. And that is all I wanted to cover here today. I hope that you will join me again in SLIPS Part 2. If you have any specific areas or functions that I didn't cover for you, then please go ahead and send an email to us at info@taxcycle.com, and we will definitely keep that in mind when we're planning for next year. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you later.